bitch.
You kidding me right now? Friday night, Through the Black is live. We got people hanging out in the chat. What's the meaning of all this? Will somebody let you know? Yeah, I'll let you know. Hey, I am just excited to let you know that we have a good friend, a good co-host that has how do you even do this? On hiatus, has went missing. No, she's I don't know, but anyway, she went missing, but we found her. Vicki Joy Anderson, come on in. Hey, what's up?
Oh, MIA in the house. Oh my gosh.
Crowd goes wild. Yeah.
This is surreal, man. I know. I was like, oh gosh.
Dude, I'm going to cry right now. Hey, I want to know everything that's been going on with you. And I want to tell you everything that's been going on with me, but we don't have time.
No, not tonight.
We got a crazy show, right?
This is going to be awesome. I'm really excited about this show. And I was surprised how quickly we got it together. We're doing good for once.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, we need to get into it because there's a lot to talk about. Hey, sorry folks, I know you want to know how Vicki's been doing, but we can't. It's going to have to happen. Vic, let me ask you this.
Yes.
Is it true that you're going to come back and do some more shows like in the next couple months? Is that a true thing?
It's true. It's true.
It's true.
Okay. I like how you asked.
Like really put you on the spot right there because I didn't know what you were going to say.
I like how you asked me on the air for the first time.
Yeah.
But no, of course.
Yeah. Well, we kind of talked about it, like it was going to happen, but
yeah,
I'm just like, yeah, we're going to keep you accountable now. Hey, I know you're a busy girl, and I've been busy. It's been crazy. Things have changed, and we're actually going to meet up in less than a month at the Go Therefore conference. Okay. Pastor Mike Spalding putting it on down in Dayton, Ohio area. Yeah, there it is. July 26th and 27th. And of course, Derek and Sharon are going to be there. We've got Greg Reed. We've got myself. We've got Judd Burton, Joe Horn from your neck of the woods. Okay, right? Pastor Carl Gallops. Paul Begley, who am I missing? L.A. Marzulli. So it's going to be cool. And yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other stuff going on. We got some other friends that are showing up. So, and Vic, you're not speaking at this conference, but you're going to be there hanging out, doing your thing.
I'll be there.
So,
I'll have a book table. Kenny C will be there. Kenny will be there. And yeah, Kenny and I opted. Mike wanted to do a smaller speaker set so that the speakers would have a longer time to talk and there'd be more time for fellowship in between sessions. So Kenny and I both opted to speak next year. So we'll be there next year too, but we will be there with our book tables, and Kenny's got all sorts of swag he's bringing now. He's up in his game. If you're following him on Facebook, he's got so much stuff, man. He's gonna have to bring a U-Haul.
Kenny, like, anyway, shout out. Hey, I also want to mention real quick, I was made aware David Heavener has some kind of premiere for his the Last Evangelist series. So yeah, we'll have a link in the show notes of how you can be involved or check it out or watch it or whatever. So I got a call on that the other day, and we just want to let everybody know. David Heavener, wow, dude, he's got a really cool studio down there where he lives in Louisville area. And he makes really cool and working on a series, The Last Evangelist. So check that out. Vic, we got to get into this. Okay, set this up. We have a special guest tonight. Can you give an intro, or just how'd you meet this dude? What's the story?
Yeah, this is so cool. So,
I know this guy, by the way.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
Okay.
So I was in Colorado Springs a week ago when I don't know, recently, and selling books at Marzulli's table, Prophecy Watchers Conference. And so our guest came up to the table and he's like, hey, I know Kenny C. let's freak him out. Can I take a picture? We're going to send him a picture. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So we took the picture. We sent it to Kenny. Kenny, of course, texted back in 4.2 milliseconds. And, but anyway, we got to talking and I was like, oh, dude, your testimony is so awesome. Your information is awesome. And I said, would you ever be willing to go on the record? And he knew all about you. He knew all about Russ. And so I was like, oh, this is perfect. So we got it together. So everybody, please give a warm welcome to Shawn Rae.
Hey, my friend, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How's everybody doing?
Hey, sorry it took so long. Vicki and I had catching up to do, but
it's all good. Thanks for the intro.
Hey, absolutely. I'm so stoked you're on. This is super cool.
Well,
yeah, I wasn't expecting it this soon because I had my baby and I was going to try to stay out till August. But then I talked to my wife last night and she's like, "Go ahead and do it."
Awesome. So, thank you, wife.
Yeah, thank the wife
and Kenny C, because Kenny C recommended you a long time ago, and I'm kind of slow about getting to stuff. So it took.
It's all God's timing.
Get you on. Yeah. So I don't even know where to start. I've been given some clues about what's going on, but I know you have an amazing testimony, Shawn, and I kind of want to get into it and just let everybody know like some of your background, where you grew up, and we're just going to kind of get into the progression and how you came to Christ and all that stuff. And we'll probably interrupt a lot along the way and ask some questions. So we'll keep our eye on the chat too to see if there's any questions in there. But yeah, just start from the beginning or wherever you want to.
Yeah, let the Holy Spirit lead, right? So I was originally born in Norwalk, Connecticut. Young teenage mother, young father. I think my mom was 15 when she had me. She had a very hard upbringing. My grandmother had married a high-level Freemason, and so he was a really evil man, and he used to traumatize and torture my mother when she was young. Would lock her in her room and I'm not going to go too far into details, but I mean, I know it really affected her to the point to where she ended up moving out east. And so I was born on the East Coast, actually. And then, my mother and father weren't doing all that well. My dad was heavily into the streets, into drugs and things like that. And so my mom ended up leaving my father and moved us back to Illinois. So I moved to Illinois when I was 2. I lived outside of Chicago, more in my younger years, a little small town outside of Chicago. Around my grandparents and stuff. My grandmother helped take care of me, helped raise me and things from the time that I was really young. But without having my father in my life, it really, I struggled with that emotionally, psychologically, and I just took it out on everybody. I turned into just kind of an angry kid, and my mom was really young, so she tried the best she could, but I was just, I was a hellraiser. By the time I was 9 years old, I'm running out the house, running away from the house and hanging out with all the older cats on the streets and stuff. And, I ended up getting adopted into my friends' families and things because all I ever really wanted was like a tight knit family, and I didn't have that at home and stuff. And my mom and I didn't get along because of it. She couldn't handle me. And I look back now and I treated her like crap. I mean, I know I was young and I know I was dealing with a lot, but like I said, I took it out on everybody, mainly at home and stuff like that. And so got into a lot of trouble, started doing drugs really, really young. I started popping pills when I was about 9 years old. By the time I was about 10, going on 11, I was really heavy in the streets. Like my mom couldn't keep me in the house. And so my grandmother said, well, I'll take him to come live with me and we'll see how he does with me. And so moved into my grandparents' house.
Right there. Real quick, and I want you to pick up in just a minute, going back to that. But let me ask you a question. So at 9 years old, man, you are dealing with some really heavy things, okay? Absence of your father, and then drugs introduced into your life, and on the streets, finding, basically other families. Was there, I just want to ask this question. Was there anybody that had any kind of spirituality, or did you ever step foot in a church anywhere, like Sunday school or something? by that point?
Yes. So my grandmother was a devout Christian. She loved the Lord with all of her heart. You know, she told me from the time that I was a child that she would die praying for me. And she said she didn't matter. She didn't care what it took. You know, she's like, I'll do whatever I can to help you. Because I was the firstborn male in the family, she really, you know, and I was the firstborn period. She really, you know, she had like a deep love for me, and just I had a connection with my grandmother that, you know, even my mom tells me still today, like, yeah, your grandmother loved you dearly. Like she went above and beyond for me, and you know, I took advantage of it, you know, or whatever. But she was the only person in my life, and I look back now, but she was the only person I ever really listened to. Like she would tell me, hey, don't do that, or hey, I need you to do that. And I would say yes, I would listen to her. Like something in me, I just always felt, you know, and I think it was because she was the only person that never really talked down to me. You know, she
respected her.
I loved her. I respected her. Like I had just a deep respect and honor for my grandmother. And, you know, she was just the most sweetest and gentle woman, you know, you would ever meet. And then when I got heavy into the gangs,
I can identify with that. I had a good relationship with my grandma, and it was the same way. And I had a lot of things kind of set before my path, and it was always, what would my grandma think? You know, like if I did this bad thing, you know. So I'm like, I don't want to do anything to hurt my grandma. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it definitely prolonged a lot of the decisions I would make, like as far as like getting tattoos or piercings or anything of that nature. You know, she always talked about, you know, Shawn, your body's a temple. You want to take care of your body. And, you know, so she instilled a lot of these things into my life from the time I was a child, you know. And yeah, she did. She would take me to Sunday school, but she ended up adopting me from my mother because I was just too much to handle. And when I moved in with my grandparents, I started to do really good. Like I started to get straight A's in school. I got into I love playing basketball. Growing up in the Midwest basketball is just, you know, it's a second thing for me. But so she got me into sports, got me into music, and I started doing really well. You know, I had so the man she married wasn't my real grandfather. He was my step grandfather, but she was married to him from before I was born. And so I always called him my grandfather. So I'll even still kind of call him my grandfather because my real grandfather wasn't in my life either. And so most of my family is just very disassociative and stuff. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, obviously families have their issues, but there were some deep spiritual splitting that happened within my family. And it stemmed, you know, just from just a lot of the stuff that was brought into the home in my mom's house and stuff like that. But anyway, but yeah, my grandmother, she loved Jesus, and she, you know, she'd bring me to school or to Sunday school. But I remember being in Sunday school and I used to rob the pop machines at the same Sunday school. They had this soda machine. They used to sit there and I used to stick my arms up there and give everybody sodas in the Sunday school.
Oh, man.
So like, man, I never took it. You know, I never heard the message really. You know what I mean? Like it didn't ever really register with me. But, you know, there was always those moments in my life where it was like, oh, Jesus, help, you know, and like the Lord would show up. And so, you know, I got many of those stories as I get, you know, deeper into the streets and into the prison life and stuff like that, gang life. There are those, you know, SOS moments, right? You know, where it's just like, Jesus. And I look back and the Lord showed up every time I cried out to him. And so even before I was, you know, surrendered to him like I am today, like he's always been in my life, you know, and so I'm grateful for that. But I look back and I know it was because of my grandmother and because of her prayers, you know, like that was the biggest thing for me. And what actually turned me into a prayer warrior today is because of my grandmother's prayers for me. And it saved my life because I should have been dead, you know, 10 times over. But yeah, my grandmother meant a lot to me. My grandfather was a hard worker. And so, you know, during that time I lived with him, you know, I would help him roof houses, and he did all of the maintenance on his house. You know, they bought a Victorian and he remodeled it all himself. And I helped him build a garage and things like that. And so I always did really well in a structured environment, which I think is the reason why I got so seduced by the gang life, because that's when me personally, where I felt like I was starting to excel. where I felt like I was gaining respect. I was gaining, a liking, by people who weren't necessarily my family, but we treated each other like family. And that's most of us come from broken homes and things like that. You got guys that had good homes and stuff like that, but you become a product of your society. And around a city like Chicago, you go one of two directions. You either got family that's going to fight for you to keep you out of that life, or you're going to end up in that life one way or another. It's just, Chicago is mobster city. Everyone's affiliated with something somewhere. And if you're not, then you'll get beat up. Just plain and simple. It's like,
if you're not the predator, you're the prey.
Absolutely. And I had a lot of respect growing up with guys who what we call in the city neutrons, guys who never joined a gang or anything like that. But I'd watch them get the crap beat out of them almost daily. And so it's a pretty hostile environment, growing up in the streets of Chicago and stuff like that. But I didn't actually get submersed into the streets until I was a younger teenager. And so we can,
that's what I was going to ask next is about what year did you start to get into the gangs, and what was that like? I mean, did you notice, something's happening here, or did you just wake up one day and be like, oh, wow, this is my life now?
So, like I said, I ran the streets. You know what I mean? I got involved in all different kinds of crazy stuff. I was, like I said, I was an adrenaline junkie growing up, right? So, I was jumping off bridges into water. I was, running through, gang-infested neighborhoods. And I was just always, like, chasing after, the rush. Like, I was always looking for a high, And so I guess the gang stuff, like, so I had a best friend that I grew up with. I call him a frenemy because we used to fight each other all the time growing up, but he was my best friend. But he had a brother-in-law who was affiliated with the gang that I eventually got affiliated with later on. But he hung around us, all the time. And so, even in the little towns in Illinois are infested with gangs, believe it or not. Like people think that if you go to these little small cities that you're going to escape it. You're not. You can't outrun it. It's like the whole center of the map is pretty infested with that stuff. Now you do got people who grow up in good households, go to college, go to school, and never see that stuff. Like I was talking to a brother out here from Illinois. He was from Berwyn, Illinois, and I know the gangs in Berwyn, but he was totally separated from all that. So I do run into people that it's like that wasn't a part of their life, or even they were never associated with it. But me personally, because I was so infatuated with the streets that it comes your way, either way. And so before I even actually became official within the organization, I was hanging out with gang members, from the time I was real young. And so, but then you notice what happens is like, you become friends with these guys, but then there comes a point to where it's like, all right, bro, you got to go. We got to handle business. And it's like, all of a sudden, just like that, they'll split, go do whatever they're going to do in their own little secret little whatever. And then, come back around later on and act like they didn't just do anything. You know what I mean? And so that's the kind of stuff that always stuck with me because I'm like a know-it-all. I'm the guy that always has to press the red button. I got to see what's going on over here, over there. I was always interested in everything that was going on. And secrecy was not something that I was all about. I wanted to know what was going on. So, eventually you start asking the deeper questions, like what y'all got going on, like what can I get involved? You know what I mean? And so, the gangs are always looking for people who are encouraged by that stuff, who are, influenced by it. And, most of the time they come to you if they feel like, you're somebody that would be appropriate for the gang or whatever. But in my case, it was a little bit different. Like I was seeking family. I was seeking acceptance. I was seeking, just a brotherhood. And so from the time that I ever even come across, seeing the gang stuff, I was already infatuated by it. I was already seduced by it. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, I was already in my mind willing to do whatever it took to be a part of something bigger than myself, And so it started real young, but it didn't, like I said, didn't become official until I moved into the inner city of Chicago and I moved into what they call the motherland of the SDs, which was the gang that I was affiliated with, called Satan's Disciples. And so, but yeah, that's when it really got real for me, is when I, actually was going through what we call the nation business, the things that you got to do to go through to get to where you can become a part of the gang, And so that stuff happened.
So for listeners out there that don't know, what is it like? What are the rules, like the basic rules of a gang? Like once you get initiated, or I mean, can you share that? Was there initiation?
There's definitely an initiation. I got jumped in. I got beat in because I wasn't, actually. So you got guys.
For anybody that doesn't know, explain what getting jumped in means.
So you take, so back when I got jumped in, it was 2.5 minutes. And so you put your hands behind your back. So it's either 2.5 minutes body shots or 3.5 minutes, and you can take headshots. Or sorry, the other way around. So 3.5 minutes body shots, 2.5 minutes with headshots. So you can get a minute knocked off if you let them, knock you around upstairs too. And so I took the 2.5 minutes, man. I let them go ahead and wail on me. And I ended up coming out the other end with what they call a pumpkin head. So like all the blood rushes to your brain and your head swells up like a pumpkin, right? And so that's how I got into the gang. But it wasn't prior to that. I was already, putting in work. I was already like robbing. I was already stealing. I was already, shooting. I was already a part of what they call aid and assist. Because that's what you do. You have to aid and assist before you get actually, grafted into the gang. But when I finally got beat in, I ended up going to the hospital that night because I'm like, man, I was freaking out a little bit because I'd seen all my guys get beat in, but I was the only one that ended up with the pumpkin head.
So, Shawn, I'm curious, obviously if you work in an ER in Chicago and all these guys come in with they got to know what's going on. They're not dumb. Did they just turn a blind eye to that, or are they?
They have to. They have to. Yeah, they have to do their job, and that's it. Because in a place like Chicago, they're called the cleanup crew. So like the police force, the EMTs, that's the cleanup crew. They don't even come around until, they hear the last gunfire, then they'll wait about 15, 20 minutes and then they'll roll in,
Wow.
It's like they don't even mess around because cops get killed by crossfire all the time. I got a story of a undercover cop getting killed right on my block, right in front of me, because he came in, in plain clothes. He got caught right in the middle of crossfire and right there, and that happens often. And so, but yeah, as far as like like EMTs and the hospitals and things like that, like they just have to do what they're called to do. And you'll step into the ER and you got guys with bullet holes hanging out, waiting in the ER for hours, like bleeding out. People die in those waiting rooms all the time, and then, you got to worry about leaving the hospital too, because as soon as you leave that hospital, you're in rival gang territory. So you got to try to get back to your own block. You got to get through, and you never know if you piss somebody off enough, they'll be standing outside the hospital waiting for you.
So Shawn, for those of us who have just seen an occasional movie and Michael Jackson's Beat It video, what do you guys actually like? I mean, we know the phraseology and the turf wars and whatever, but what exactly does that mean? What are these gangs fighting over? What's the battle behind all of the violence?
So a lot of it's power and control. Everybody's trying to, make a name for themselves, but more importantly, everybody's trying to expand their enterprise. So it's always about expansion when it comes to get, not all of them. So here's the thing. Chicago's got about 200 to 300 different gangs in the city.
Oh my God.
So you have two, I'll just break it down. You have two separate nations. You have the folk nation and then you have the people nation. And then you have gangs that are under those nations. And so each gang that's under those nations has their own lit, has their own laws, has their own history. Right. And so when the organization of the gangs became a thing, that was in the 70s. And that started to happen. That happened by Larry Hoover. And we can kind of go into a little bit about how that happened. But before the gangs were structured, it was mainly just a lot of party crews and stuff from the neighborhoods, because Chicago is a sanctuary city. We've been getting immigrants into the city. We have movements of immigrants that come into the city, and it'll push, a certain race out of a certain area of the city, and it'll be a whole new race all of a sudden will be in that area. And so that's kind of like what happened on the South Side, where I'm from, like where I grew, kind of got my roots from. I grew up in predominantly a Mexican neighborhood. And so before that, it was all Polish and Czech Republic white people, right? And so a lot of the gangs that were started by them, but then adopted by, the Mexicans and the blacks and things when those movements came into the city and stuff. And so, like I said, every gang has its own history. Every gang has its own, and some gangs have turned into other gangs and things like that. And so it's mainly about power and control. And I say that because once you become powerful enough, then you'll be able to, expand your gang into other neighborhoods, and you can start to invade other neighborhoods and stuff like that, which is what happened in the 90s. So the 90s was a bloodbath in Chicago because a lot of the bigger name gangs like the Gangster Disciples, the Black Stones, the El Rukins, a lot of the Spanish gangs come in, and they're bigger gangs. And so they start to kind of take over all these smaller neighborhoods and stuff. And so it's pretty locked in where it's at right now, as far as like what gangs are in what areas of the city. There was a while there where gangs were moving from this part to that part and stuff, but it's pretty stationary kind of where the gangs are right now. And that's because a lot of them aren't organized anymore. A lot of the gangs you only see that are organized anymore are a lot of the Latin gangs, what I was affiliated with because I liked the organization. I liked the structure, I like that environment where it's like everybody has a job to do. Everybody's going to be held accountable for that job. And it's a business, really. And that's how a lot of the gangs are set up in Chicago, as a business, And we move a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
We can get into that too. Chicago back in the early 2000s. So I went, I was not far. I was about maybe 10 blocks from what we call the Twins. So there were these two Latin kings that lived in the city that their father was like this with El Chapo. And so they were moving 80% of the cocaine into the United States was coming through the Twins in Chicago. And so we have a lot of deep connections with the cartels and stuff like that, which is where we get all of our work. And then like all of our guns and stuff like that, believe it or not, a lot of the politicians bring a lot of the guns into the city and stuff too. And so there's deep corruption in Chicago. I mean, it's as deep as you can go,
No doubt.
Guys who are affiliated with gangs. You've got your doctor who just sewed you up, could be affiliated with a gang. Everyone's affiliated with something.
Yeah. Folks, if you are just joining us, we're talking to Shawn Rae, and he's just kind of sharing some background about growing up in Chicago and growing up and getting initiated into a gang and kind of giving the background on it. Now, Chicago, obviously there's a lot of history. There's a lot of movies. I mean, if people want to think way back 100 years, you could think of people like Al Capone, and gangsters like this coming out of that area. And there was, just a very, I want to kind of open conflict between, government or law enforcement and gangsters. And it's very notorious. I mean, we could talk about New York, we could talk about LA, but Chicago, man, it has a history, and it's still going on. Somebody just mentioned, and I saw this number last week, over 4th of July. People are getting shot up there, over 100 people shot. I don't know how many people killed. I mean, we're seeing numbers coming out of Chicago all the time with the murders. That's mostly gangs, right?
Hey, and I'll give you the website. So it's called HeyJackass.com. If you want to go to that website, you get all of your Chicago statistics. But you know, outside of getting, you know, a headline once or twice a year, that stuff's going on every weekend. You know, it's like a thing to politicize the 4th of July in Chicago, you know, because that's when, there's a lot of gang wars and a lot of people dying, but like those numbers, we're reaching those numbers every other weekend, you know, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. They only think that it happens in these certain times, and it's like, no, that's just when they tell you. You know, like Chicago is a city that runs on its own statistics. So I'll share this little stat. Last year, the beginning of last year, so I was sharing this all year last year. Beginning of last year, I remember it was like the first 23 weeks of the year, there were like 21 school shootings, right? That's the national database. So you go into Chicago statistics, out of the first 23 weeks, just in Chicago alone, there were 19 school shootings. So why is that not on the national database, right? So that's what I mean about Chicago. It's like the politics stay within the city. You know, the statistics stay within the city until you get a headline every now and again. And so that's why people think that, you know, I'm saying Chicago is, no, it's not as bad as like, you know, Detroit or this or that. Like, yeah, right. Yeah, right. It's unbelievable. It's genocide in Chicago. That's the way I put it. You know, it's like, and yes, it's mostly gang activity, mostly. You know, obviously you got all different kinds of stuff going on, but the homicide rate in Chicago is predominantly gang infested. And because of that, we have 11 to 12% conviction rate for homicides in Chicago. So you're almost guaranteed to get away, even, you know, and in a city like Chicago, it's a badge of honor. You know, I hate to say it, but like it's sick, it's twisted. You know, we always say, man, I'm born and bred here, because you're bred a certain way, you know. You're bred to think and act a certain way. And it's like, you really don't even realize how perverted it is until you leave the city. So you start to see other cities, and it's like, man, they ain't living like we're living, you know. I remember the first time I moved, because I moved up to Minneapolis after I left Chicago, and I'm like, you know, there's a lot of gangs from Chicago up in Minneapolis, but man, I noticed that it was like super laid back, super chill, like people weren't set tripping like that, and people wearing colors wherever they wanted to. And I'm like, man, this ain't nothing like Chicago, you know. And every other city I've been to after that, I realized it's like, man, Chicago's sick. We're sick, you know, truly.
Shawn, can you explain like some of the lingo? Like, can you explain to the people what is a set? What is a sign? Gang signs, like. What?
So a set is an organization or a gang. So I'll say this: the word gang that label wasn't given to us until I think it was the early 80s, and that was by the police force. The police force were the original ones that called us gangs, and that was because at that time they were working on trying to be able to take us down for RICO like they did the mob. Right, but they couldn't at that point. They couldn't figure out how to do it with the street gangs, and so that's when they started to label us as gangs, and it was pretty much for, you know, political purposes, but for legal purposes, you know. So we call ourselves organizations or sets. Like a set is an organization or the gang that you're affiliated with, and so it's like if you run into somebody on the streets of Chicago, it's like what you be about. What you know, where you from? And so you let them know, hey, you know, I'm Ambro from 18th and Cal, or, you know, or whatever. You kind of let people know what's up, right? And so that's what it means to be a part of a set, is just being a part of an organization. As far as like gang lingo and things like that, you know, we have certain things that we say to each other. We call each other, hey, what up, folk? Like we'll call, like, because I'm part of what's called the Folk Nation. Folk Nation is, you know, what we call the right side of the pillar, and so this is where it bleeds into masonry and stuff like that. We can talk a little bit about that, but so we identify each other as folks, or like if I run across another SD, somebody who's affiliated with the same gang as me, I say Amor de Diablo, and so, you know, we say love for Satan, right? Because that's the set we're affiliated with, right? And then you have, you know, Amor del Rey, which is Latin Kings, you know. And so we have certain, like I said, we have certain things we say to each other. to greet each other and stuff like that. And then, obviously everybody knows about stacking and stuff like that. I'm not going to put too much of that on the camera and stuff, but we have logos and we have things that we do, you know what I'm saying? That's how we speak to each other. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so we've got crowns, we've got, so the Folk Nation, I can throw this down. It's the 6-point star, right? So the literature for that is love, life, loyalty, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So I just gave you some gang literature. I'm not going to get in trouble for that because it's out there now. You know what I'm saying? You can look this up online, and if anybody wants to say anything, whatever, it is what it is. Like, this is what it is. We're all out here sharing our stories now, which is the ministry that I have, that I'm a part of, Wrong to Strong. We all came from that gang life in Chicago. We've all got testimonies and stories, coming from that life and stuff. And so, yeah.
So, Shawn, I'm curious. So when you say that your gang is SD, Satan's Disciples, I think you said,
that Satan Disciples?
Satan Disciples. So
yeah.
Is that just a cool name, or are we talking real occult knowledge?
So it started off as a very intimidating name, obviously. Mm-hmm. So the SDs are kind of looked at as like the enforcers of the Latin folk nation. So under the folk nation, you got a whole nother nation called the Latin folks, right? Because under the folk nation, you'll have black gangs, Puerto Rican gangs, Mexican gangs, and then a lot of those gangs are interracial too in Chicago. And so that's another difference about Chicago is like, I'm a part of a Latin organization. I'm a white guy, right? We got black guys. We got Puerto Ricans. We got Mexicans. We got Cubans. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If you're willing to ride with the set, then they'll accept you as one of theirs. Mm-hmm. So that's where the biggest difference is between Chicago and California. In California, they're really interracial. If you're white, you're running with the Aryans. If you're black, then you're fighting either Crip or Blood, or you know what I'm saying, and so on and so forth. But Chicago is a little different in that respect. Where if you're living in that neighborhood, that's the gang you're going to be affiliated with, And even if you're not officially a part of the gang, you're guilty by association. They'll put you in the gang database. The police will. They'll lock you up and mark you as a gang member. And, we got families that are fighting tooth and nail to get their sons and daughters out of the gang database because they're not affiliated with any gangs. But because the city is so organized, like that's how they have to identify you. They have to identify you. If you're from that neighborhood, you're with that set. And that's just the way it is,
Wow.
Amazing. Again, folks, thanks for subscribing to the channel and giving us a thumbs up. And we love hearing your comments in the chat or afterwards in the comments section. So, wow, Shawn, I don't know where to go from here.
I could go any different direction, man. I'll say this. I could
go ahead.
I like to kind of like, not like to, but because I am, that's Chicago's the city that I ran around, that I'm used to, that I'm from. I can say that that's what I know the most about. But I do know that Chicago is the only major city that doesn't have any California gangs in it either. And so we used to have treaties back in the day, one particularly called the 8 Ball, right? So if the Crips came to Chicago, they'd have to bang with the GDs, right? And so any gang that comes from like any other city, wherever you're coming to in the city, you got to ride with that organization or you just ain't gonna make it. You don't want to get caught at a stop sign or nothing like that. You don't want to get caught alone. You don't want to get lost. None of that stuff. But Chicago also has gangs in every other country. So it started off just, predominantly the central Midwest. And then this thing flooded like a virus. And we're in 49 out of 50 states. And we're in like 7 different countries right now, too. And so the Chicago gangs are all over the world now.
So what's interesting about this and I just want to take a short pause here. What this really is tribalism. If we had a group of people that were all the same race on an island somewhere, sooner or later, those groups are going to break off. And maybe they're not violent. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if you use any group, like take a church group. Churches split all the time. Now, churches, and it kind of becomes tribalism. That's an example of the same type of thing, but there's no violence. They're not shooting each other when they leave, or they're not fighting. You know what I'm saying? But we can take a look at a place like Ireland, where fighting over religion. Okay, and it's not necessarily about race. It can be, but obviously the black gangs are fighting each other. You know. And they're killing each other. So I think it's interesting that another example I can think of is we see pro-life ministries fighting each other. You know, they're supposed to be on the same team. And this type of thing happens in all different parts of life. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. No, it does. I'm glad you brought up tribalism, because I don't see anything wrong with being tribal. In a sense, like being a part of like a community or a group of people that you guys got each other's back, you know, especially in the church, like pray for one another, come alongside one another. But you know how it is if you're tribal, you know, you got Steve over there that believes some crazy stuff, right? I don't believe what he believes, but that's still my brother, right? Yeah. But tribalism is like, no, everybody's going to adopt the same theory, the same agenda. Everybody's going to act according to that agenda, or else you ain't going to be affiliated with the tribe, you know? And so I like that you brought up tribalism, because that's what gangs are. It's tribalism, right? You're not free to make your own decisions necessarily. Like you're owned by the organization, you know, and it's, you know, it's kill or be killed in that situation. It's like, you got to do a lot to earn your respect, especially in a city like Chicago. Like it ain't easy. You know, I tell people all the time, man, everybody from Chicago's got PTSD. Everybody, you know, it's like everybody, we're all twisted. I just started to get a sound mind over the last, 6 years. I found the Lord. But until then, man, it's like, even my wife, when she got with me, she's like, man, you were just all over the place when I met you. Because I was, I couldn't keep a straight thought. Like I was just everywhere, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, the occult activity, I know you brought that up too. Yes. So a lot of the higher ups within the gangs are organized occult members, most of them, and especially within the Latin organizations, you know what I'm saying? You got you got the Saint of Death, right? They Santa Muerta, right? They worship the Saint of Death and within the Mexican culture and stuff. And then you got Boveria, which is within the Puerto Rican culture and things like that. And so all of these things are mixed in within the gang stuff, and that's what eventually organized this, the whole structure, right? That's pretty much how we got our entire structure, like folk and people nations and stuff like that.
But at the core of it, at the foundation, it's very occultic, very satanic.
Absolutely. So before it was even like organized as far as like folks and people, like I said, before all that organization, which happened in like 73, 74 in Stateville Prison with Larry Hoover. So Larry Hoover, he was one of the higher ups within the Gangster Disciple. He wasn't the leader. People get that mixed up. He was a leader of the Gangster Disciples, but the leader of the GDs back in those days was David Barksdale. And then you had a couple other kings under him too. But Larry Hoover had came from the South Side, and he had a gang called the Supreme Gangsters. David Barksdale was the Devil's Disciples. They came together and created the Black Gangster Disciple Nation. And so they went to war with each other. Those gangs broke off. This is where we got Black Disciples and Gangster Disciples. And then we got all these different sets that went to war with one another. And so eventually come the 70s, Larry Hoover decided to organize the groups. And from the 70s to the 80s, until the 90s hit, you had a lot of peace treaties within the gangs. Like if you were a part of the Latin folk nation, there's like, I would say 6 primary Latin folk gangs within that nation, and we would all have peace with one another. But what happens is, people start, messing with one another. And a lot of it happens like you end up sleeping with one of the opposite gang's girls, and then next thing you know, bro's getting jumped on and shot, and then next thing you know, it's coming back at you, and it's just, it's back and forth. But Larry Hoover himself and also David Barksdale were 33rd degree Freemasons from the Prince Hall Lounge. So, if anybody knows anything about Masonry, you can't be Black and be a Freemason. But there came a time where, you know, it's actually in this book too, which I was surprised to read, but there came a time where they allowed the blacks to create their own organization within the realm of Freemasonry. And that's where we get the Prince Hall Lounge. And so back in the 70s is when that was really predominant here in the West Coast, or here in the West, was the Prince Hall Lounge started to pop up, and you saw a lot of these black Masonic organizations pop up. And so that's where Larry Hoover and King David came in, and that's where the structure of the game came from. It's the whole layout of Freemasonry, you know, the whole, I'm not going to go too into detail, but like, you know, that's where we get the 6-point star on the right, the 5-point star on the left. You know, that's where we get all of our gang, you know, logos and things. We've got pyramids, we've got snakes, we've got devils, we've got all, you know, all of this stuff is adopted from ancient occult literature, really. And I started to realize where a lot of that stuff came from when I moved out to Colorado, and I came across a high-level witch out here from Breckenridge. And we ended up in his garage one night, and he was showing me some of his books, you know, some of his books from Crowley and a couple other Masonic books from like Albert Pike, Manly P. Hall, things like that. And I started reading into some of this literature, and I started to notice, like, man, this is all of our gang literature. Right? So that's when I, you know, started to put 2 and 2 together. It was like, oh man, you know, I started to realize like this was a lot deeper than I thought. Now I knew the gang leaders were affiliated with that stuff, but I didn't really realize how much of it they incorporated into the organizations and stuff. And so it's most gang members don't know anything about Freemasonry. I'll tell you that right now. And there's probably a lot of gang members on here that, you know what I'm saying, or people that listen in and like, man, I don't know nothing about that. And this could be higher ups within the gangs too, might not know anything about some of this. But it's there. And, you know, I've actually been helping a lot of guys come to realize a lot of these things since we've gotten saved too. And so it's been a part of what I feel like the ministry God has given me is enlightening to some of these stuff, especially those of us who come from these organizations and things, knowing the roots, knowing the history of how this stuff came about. I found for me it was important. You know, I felt like I needed to know these things in order to be effective in a lot of these different areas, you know.
Shawn, is there anything that you can tell us, just kind of maybe a story or a situation where you thought, man, I'm in over my head, and you mentioned that you had that foundation with your grandma where you're calling out to God, or you're having conviction because you're seeing some crazy stuff. I mean, I don't know your whole story. I'm assuming, you know, that you landed in jail a time or two, and you know, just in a crazy situation, maybe even where you thought you were going to die. I mean, can you elaborate on what I'm asking here? I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got plenty of stories and stuff I can share, especially from the streets. You know, you're constantly finding yourself in situations where what we call riding on your ops, right? So what we'll do is, man, we'll go head hunting, you know, and so the gangs will, you know, we'll jump in our Rammers, our Suburbans, or, you know, our big old box Chevys or whatever, and we'll go out looking for, you know, opposing gang members and stuff. And so that's just kind of part of what we do. We call it head hunting, you know. And so anytime you come across opposing gang, you know, first thing it is kill on sight. And so a lot of times you find yourself in these situations, man, you could just be going to the mall, right? And then all of a sudden you look over and you see one of your ops and forget the mall, right? Mall that's dead and gone, right? Now you're going after your ops. So I found myself in a situation one day, man, where we were all the way deep into the South Side. This was Latin King territory. I don't even know how we ended up out there. I think we were actually going to a house party. A lot of house parties in Chicago. That's where you see a lot of things pop off, is at house parties and stuff. And so I think we were actually leaving a house party. And we look over and we saw one of the leaders of the Latin Kings standing outside of this restaurant. And my guy Snoopy's like, hey, that's bro. And so we thought he was maybe had one or two other people with him. And so we peel into the gas station. Next thing you know, they spot us, and then they circled the car about 100 deep. I mean, it was like ants came out of an anthill And all of a sudden we were just surrounded, and there's only 4 of us in the car. And so I'm looking at Snoop. I'm like, what are we going to do, bro? And he's like, man, we got to ride. We got to ride. And so he jumps out the car and he just starts rocking on him. And I'm like, oh, man, my heart's racing in the back seat. The guys in the back, they jump out the car. They start rocking. So next thing you know, I see my buddy in the back seat get shot. And so I grab him and I throw him back in the car. And I'm like almost frozen in the car. But I know Snoop's looking at me like giving me the eye. Like, where you at? Where you at? And so I jump out. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, Lord. Because I've done this plenty of times. Plenty of times it's crazy, right? You end up in these situations, but for some reason, you just feel fearless sometimes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You just feel like untouchable. And that's what the gang does to you, man. It gives you a big head, right? It makes you think that, you know what I'm saying, that you're the biggest gangster in the city. It's like, everybody thinks that way, right? And so this particular time, this is the first time my heart started racing out my chest, and I thought for sure I was done. Like, and I've never shared this story with my wife either. And so I jump out the car, I grab my boy in the back, throw him in the car, and then they're nailing on me. They're like nailing on me. The car is just getting like Swiss cheese. And I look up and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm looking for Snoop, and Snoop's gone. Well, the leader, the guy that we were going after, he had Snoop with a couple other guys on the side of the building just beating the dog crap out of him. And so now I'm really freaking out. So I go running around the side of the building and I start nailing on him. I grab my boy Snoop, and supernaturally, I don't know how I got him in the car, but I got him in the car, man, and I jump in the seat and I take off, and we were out of there. But that was the first incident where I actually felt like I was going to lose my life. But for some reason I didn't, and I don't know how, because they turned that car into Swiss cheese, and my boy only got hit once in the shoulder. That was it. And so I remember we went back to the house, and man, we was talking mad crap, like, yeah, we got them, because we hit about 9-10 of them, you know, just the 4 of us. And like I said, dude, it looked like 100 people surrounding us. I swear. And so that's just one of those incidents that, you know, I told my grandma about it, and she wrote me a letter one day, and she's like, now we know, Shawn, now we know why God is protecting you. Now we know why you have a guardian angel. And she would tell me these things because I'd tell her these stories, because she was the only one I felt safe enough to share this stuff with, you know. But there were a lot of incidents like that. And then another one happened in prison. I'll share this one too, because this was a very kind of eye-opening moment for me. Like, all these times I had these SOS moments, man, like, it wasn't until I got to prison down in Florida. So I ended up catching a charge down in Florida, and I get locked up in Florida. And so they sent me to a high-level gang camp down in Florida, up in the Panhandle, called Jackson Correctional. And so I get to this camp, and it's you know, it's all lifers. It's all like 70 and above. People got 70 years and above. I still to this day don't know why they sent me to that camp, but they did. You know, I had 5 years to do. I did like 3.5 off of 5. But 2 weeks before I was about to leave, see, the whole time I was in there, a lot of the leaders of the gangs were gay, and they were messing with boys, you know, in prison. And that's a no-no where I come from. Like, that's in our laws, you know. And there are gangs that run the prisons, even down in Florida, that are Chicago gangs. And so you have a lot of Chicago gangs, and you know, you have a lot of all these other gangs and stuff too, like Nietas and MS-13s and things like that, Norteños and stuff, but Bloods and Crips. But you got a lot of Chicago gangs and stuff in there too. So that's where I fit in, is with the Chicago gangs. So I had this one incident 2 weeks before I was about to leave. And so I was the only white boy on the compound that was affiliated with a Latin organization. Mind you, most of the white boys down in Florida that are affiliated are with a set called Insane Gangster Disciples, and they're a prison gang, right? So if you're white, you're either affiliated with, some of them turn GD, some of them turn IGD, but you never see a white boy with a Latin organization. And so the whole time I was in there, they were trying to get me. They say, let me bring you home. Let me bring you home. They're trying to get me to flip, right? And I wouldn't do it. And I had a big mouth back then. Like, I was really good at running my mouth, man. And that got me killed, almost got me killed a couple times. But when I was in prison, they had this guy they were putting down 2 weeks before I was about to go home. And we were out on the rec yard. and all the IGDs circled me. They knew I was about to go home. And so they had this one cat, they were sending him out. He was putting in work, right? He's putting in work in prison. So, you know, if the gang wants him to go handle something, he'll have to go handle something. If he needs him to go slide, grab a soup over here, do something over here, he'll go do it. And so you're just kind of you're a yes man, I guess you say. And so I got all these IGDs surrounding me. They look at their old boy who's putting in work, and they're like, hey, I need you to handle the white boy. And I'm looking at him like, what you talk about? So now I'm set tripping. Set tripping is when you start throwing down their set, right? You start taking their emblems and you start tossing them down, throwing them down. And so I'm on the rec yard going crazy, throwing down their set, throwing up my set. And I'm just talking smack, stacking to them on the rec yard. And so bro was like, all right, well, let's go. So there's a bathroom on the rec yard, and it's a cement building. It's got 2 bathrooms right next to each other. But you go in that bathroom, and it's like maybe 4 foot by 4 foot each way, you know, and you got a little steel sink, and then you got the toilet right there. And so a lot of people go in there and they bump, or what they call, they get down in the bathrooms. Well, this dude that was about to take me on, he was about 6 foot tall, good 250 pounds. And the guy had been putting in work for like 3 months. I mean, fighting people all the time, you know, doing this, doing that. And so he's like extra aggressive, man. And I hadn't been in, I got into a few fights in prison down there, but I hadn't been in many because I ended up gaining a lot of respect coming from Chicago. But these IGDs didn't like me. And so I remember I'm walking down to the bathroom, and all of a sudden my heart dropped in the pit of my stomach. And I realized at that moment, I'm like, this dude's going to kill me. Like, this dude's actually going to kill me in this bathroom. And I believe this to be true because guys were getting airlifted out of there once a week. Guys were getting airlifted. I mean, they dropped the helicopter right in the middle of the rec yard, throw a dude in there and take him off. And then this was happening once a week, you know, guys getting hammers in the back of their heads and all type of stuff. And so I thought for sure I was done. So as we're walking to the rec yard, I said it in my head. I'm like, Jesus, help me. And right after I said that, I heard a whistle. And I turn around and I see the leader of the IGDs do like this and called it off right there. And I'm like, whoa. So, you know, I pretty much, I'm like, at that moment, that whole Jesus help me kind of, I ain't gonna lie, like my ego kicked right back in. I'm back throwing up my set. I'm back throwing up.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah.
You didn't give him the glory. Yeah.
Oh, no.
I didn't. But, man, I tell this story because I'm giving him glory now. You know?
Yeah.
And this is what I mean. It's like I realized the Lord has been with me my entire life, even in my unbelief. Even in my unbelief.
Amen.
You know?
Wow.
Awesome. Wow.
So many things I want to say, so many questions I want to ask. Man, we could go for a long time on all this stuff, but so
we could. I've got about 3 prison bids. I got about 90 county bids. I got about 6 different states we could get into. I got about 10 different lives we could talk about.
So,
oh my gosh,
what? I kind of brought this up, and this is something I kind of noticed on my own. When we see, you know, and I live in a pretty laid back area of Ohio where there's a lot of wannabes. You know what I'm saying? There's people that come in. We get people that come in from Chicago. We get people that, you know, that want to be tough and they want to do this. But when somebody is disrespected, they don't care. This is what I've noticed. They don't care what the consequences are. Okay, they don't care if the consequences are I'm going to go to prison, because respect is more valuable than money. And I'll use an example. Right down the road, the hospital that I was born at, the hospital that all my kids were born at, there was a gunfight. 2 kids fighting in broad daylight, a gunfight, and the gunfight went into the ER. And these kids got to know, these were teenagers, you know, they had to know that one of them was probably going to die, the other one's going to go to prison. But they didn't care because somebody had been disrespected. I'm just sharing what I observed. It's nothing like what your experience is, but does that make sense?
Look, if you even look somebody in the eyes for too long and you don't look past them, you can get your block knocked off. That's what we say. You know, you just. So I don't know if you guys saw, there was a few years ago now, there was a guy who was on Facebook Live, and he was right close to the inner city of Chicago. I mean, he wasn't even in like it's a gang. The whole city's gang ridden, but there's some areas that are a lot worse than others, you know, like broad daylight, you get caught in a gang war kind of stuff, you know, but there's neighborhoods that wait until the sun go down. But this guy, man, he was walking through a neighborhood on Facebook Live, and he lasted maybe a minute, and he got shot while he was on Facebook Live. The phone dropped, and you could actually see the shooter step over his phone and keep shooting at him, all because he just pulled his phone out, and, you know, on the block. Like, so
what was he pulling a stunt, or what, he was just going
no
live?
He was just walking through, just doing a Facebook Live in Chicago, and got shot like a minute after he was doing the Facebook. He wasn't a gang member. What's that?
Is he a tourist or something?
I don't think he was a tourist. I think he was from Chicago, which is because so everyone walks around, man, in Chicago like ain't nothing gonna happen to them. You know, that's the scary part about Chicago, because it's the people who walk around in fear are the guys you got to worry about, because they're always constantly, you know, trigger happy. We call them trigger happy, right? So you got a lot of guys out there who got a lot of bodies under their belt, right? So you get caught walking down the road with a camera or looking at somebody too long. That's disrespecting. That in itself is disrespect. Like, what are you, the police? What are you, 5-0? You know, like, but they won't even say that. They'll just assume that you are. Like, that's the scary part about Chicago. And like, you have boundaries in that city. Here's another sad part about the city. I know guys who grew up on the south side of Chicago who've never even seen the inner city, like who've never seen the skyscrapers, because they've never made it off their 2 or 3 square block radius, because it's deadly. Like, you got guys, you got a GD set over here, and then across the street, you got vice lords across the street. You'll never get caught dead walking over there unless you're going to ride on them, or unless you're going to handle business or something like that. So, man, you'll see these hardcore gang members, right? They'll get in your car, you'll take them to a side of the city that they ain't from, and they'll start shaking in the car, freaking out, like, you got to get me out of here. Like, they won't even cross the street, some of these guys, because it's that scary. It's that scary. And like, you'll grow up like that all your life, you know, and because Chicago is so, you know, run down and stuff like that, like they pulled a lot of funding out of the city too. So a lot of schools have gotten shut down. A lot of police stations got shut down. We've got what's called red zones in Chicago, which are pretty much areas where only the gangs can operate. And if a cop has to come there for whatever reason, they need to be escorted to wherever they're going by the gangs. And so, I mean, you can even see that they even put this stuff in Chicago PD. Like, if you ever watch the show Chicago PD, like all of this, like they even show a lot of these red zones in Chicago PD. They talk about that stuff on on Chicago PD, which is crazy. You know, but that's just how it is, like in Chicago, man. You know,
are there consequences or difficulty? Like, what if a guy's like, I've had it, I'm moving to Milwaukee to buy a farm. Like, can you get out, or
you can escape? You can escape. There are guys who make it out successfully. You know, problem is it depends on how deep you were within the organization, like how much work you've put in. Because once you get to a position to where you've put in a lot of work and you've got a lot of influence in the gang, they ain't just gonna let you walk away like that.
Okay.
You know, a majority of the gang members, like, you can get beat out, right? So if you ever want to get out the gang, or you're looking to leave and you don't want them over your shoulder, you can get beat out, right? But then there's some organizations where you can retire, right? So I know the GDs, you know, at a certain age, they can retire. Like, I think it's in their 30s or whatever. And so you've got a lot of the black gangs. So here's the thing. It's like a majority of the chaos is in bloodbath and the killing and all that stuff. Yes, it's happening in the black gangs, but it's happening more within the Latin organizations. A lot of the black gangs are more about making money. more about influence and power. And so, the leader of the GDs, there's a tape out there with him talking to, I think it was Jay Prince, who was also a GD. And they were just talking about, this is how they ended up getting Larry Hoover busted, was through some of these taped conversations. But he talked about it in the tapes. He's like, look, man, real gangsters go to the polls, meaning real gangsters become a part of influence, like politics, right? And so you'll see a lot of a lot of the black gang members, Obama, for instance, end up becoming, the president, so to speak, right? So Obama is from a Blackstone neighborhood. Obama's from a predominantly GD neighborhood, but he rode with vice lords and stuff. And so that's what I mean, is like a lot of the higher ups within the gangs put themselves in positions of power.
How about the Daly family?
Wow.
Were they more political mobsters or what?
Irish mob. Yeah. Okay. So that's how Daly got busted. His father was the mayor for 3 decades, I think, or whatever. And then his son, Richard Daly, came in, and it was actually, if I remember correctly, it was the GDs who found out that Daly was a part of it. Not only was he a part of the Irish mob, but he was a shot caller. And what makes this so crazy is because Mayor Daly, he put a lot of gang restrictions. Like he's the one that started the stop and frisk law. So like if you have colors on that are gang oriented, then the cops will stop you and frisk you, and sometimes will even throw you in jail for gang affiliation. So that all came out under Daly in the 90s, and that ended up turning on him because he made it seem like he was trying to eradicate gangs in Chicago, but come to find out he was leading one of the highest known orders in Chicago. And so I mean, you can look into this. He got busted out and he got thrown out the city. His whole family got thrown out the city because of that.
Yeah. Wow.
So
let me ask you this, Shawn. How do gangs make money? Obviously drug trafficking was in the 90s, like 70s, 80s, 90s. Was human trafficking a thing? When is that a part of gangs today?
Yeah. So I didn't even plan on talking about that, but that was something I was a part of for a little period of time. When I got out of prison the first time, I had somebody step to me and say, hey, if you actually want to make money, let me show you the way. And I said, well, what you mean? I got these connects. He's like, nah, man. He says, the real money's in people, bro. And so I ended up meeting some guys one time that had me drive a van down to Indianapolis. I've shared this story before because, we're in a moment in time right now where this stuff is really coming to the surface. Like we're really starting to realize like this stuff, man, because if, 5-10 years ago, I wouldn't get caught dead talking about none of this stuff. Right. But because I feel like the Lord's shined a light on it. Like, hey, we got some serious stuff going on here. But yeah, you find people that are in the business of selling people for sure. You find a lot more organ trafficking in Chicago than anything. We've got chop shops, what we call them, chop shops. This can get pretty dark, talking about some of this, but the Rosemont Crown Plaza Hotel, I'm going to bring it up because I'm going to bust them out because, it's time they get their doors kicked in one of these days. But a lot of organ trafficking comes out of, the Rosemont Crown Plaza Hotel. There was a case that had happened. I think it was six years ago now, about a girl named Kanika Jenkins. Kanika Jenkins was led to a party at the Rosemont Crown Plaza Hotel, and she ended up chopped up in the freezer in the basement. And it looked and seemed like maybe her own mother had something to do with it.
Oh my goodness.
And and so you got, what's called the Order of the Eastern Star. And in Chicago, you know, all the women that run with that order are, I mean, they're demonic as it gets. They're just a group of demons. You know, they'll literally butter you up, lie straight to your face, and then they'll take everything you have, and they'll take your life too. And they make a lot of money doing it. A lot of money. There's a lot of money in the chop shop industry.
Wow.
You know, but the human trafficking stuff, like I think that's a lot more prevalent now, but that stuff's been going on in all different fashions and forms in Chicago for a long time. You know, I couldn't tell you how far back it goes, but man, people been selling people forever. You know,
right. So now, places like New York, LA, and Chicago are getting this influx of illegals coming in that are just kind of being taken across the border and bussed into the city. I haven't heard much about Chicago, but I know the areas where they're being sent in New York. So this is happening in Chicago too. I mean, what have you heard?
Yeah, so we've built. So you know, I still got a lot of connections to Chicago. One thing I'll never do is lose my connects to Chicago. I all glory to the Lord. I've been able to get out unscathed with my life, and I'm able to preach the gospel with all my heart everywhere, anywhere I want to go, to whoever I want to, you know, and I thank the Lord for that, because I never felt like this would ever be possible to be able to run my mouth to this extent, you know. So, but as far as the immigrant stuff goes, so like I said, Chicago's a sanctuary city. We've been getting busting immigrants forever, since the 1800s. You know, our city was built on immigration. You know, our city was built predominantly by the mob. You know, they built 85% of the skyscrapers in the city. The Chicago outfit organized the city. But then immigrants, you know, have been coming into the city forever. But as far as like the recent stuff, so the city that I, you know, ran around in was a little city called Pilsen. It's you got Pilsen, Little Village, North Lawndale, you know, and so that area is the predominantly, you know, Latin areas. And so I know in Pilsen, they actually recently built some high rises, particularly for the immigrants, and pushed a lot of the, you know, people from the communities out of these areas. So I know there's a lot of mad people in some of the Latin communities in Chicago right now because of what they're doing with the housing of these immigrants. Because, like I said, they pulled. This is the thing. They pulled so much money out of Chicago, like out of the police force, out of the school districts, just out of the communities, period. And Pilsen was one of these areas. And so the fact that they're pouring money back into the community, but not for the community, that's really making a lot of people mad. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because you got kids that will never go to school in some of these areas. And yet you're housing, not only that, like they're getting away with everything. Like they get away with crime. Obviously, a lot of us get away with crime, but like these people are like openly getting away. Like the cops literally can't do anything about it. It seems, you know, it's like they just kind of turned a blind eye to all of the criminal activity that's coming from the migration and stuff. But that's neither here nor there. I just know that there are a lot of, you know, a lot of uprisings and things like that in Chicago right now because of this whole movement. You know,
it sounds like,
but that also happened back in the 30s and 40s too. That we had what was called the white flight movement. You know, when all the blacks and Mexicans came into the city, it pushed all the whites. So the whole west side of Chicago was called White City at one time. It was all, I mean, it was like a theme, practically a theme park on the west side of Chicago, just called, you know, the only colored people you see there were the workers, you know, and stuff in the city. But yeah, so I mean, like there's been periods throughout history where these things have happened before. You know, it pushed people out of these areas. So Chicago's kind of used to it in its history. But like, as for today, I think we're just starting to see, you know, obviously with what's going on in our government, with what's going on in office right now, with the open borders and all that stuff. Like, it's not just Mexicans and Latins that are coming over, right? They're coming from everywhere else, and they don't speak a lick of our, you know, language, most of them, and nor do they care to, you know. And that's a whole big thing in itself. You know, just kind of the disrespect I feel like the country's getting at this point from the migration, you know?
Yeah. Shawn, you can share whatever you want and, you know, wherever your heart is, but I do want to hear about how did you come to Christ? What was that like? Because I mean, it's just amazing that you're here alive, obviously. No doubt God has had his hand, you know, on your life. And as your grandma said, guardian angels, I believe guardian angels. And to tell us, you know, what that was like.
Yeah, so I'm going to share how I got saved because obviously that's the most important part of this story is my salvation, and I wouldn't be here today without it. You know, I couldn't do what I do today without my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. You know, I will die preaching his name and speaking his name. I'm very unapologetic about my faith today, but it took a supernatural experience for this to happen. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I heard the message, it felt good, so I believe it, right? You know, I've been hearing the message all my life, you know, but it was when I actually had that encounter with God in a supernatural way that it changed my life. But so when I got out of prison the first time in Illinois, I ended up moving up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, started running around up there, and I got hooked on heroin up there. So I was DJing a strip club, Deja Vu, downtown Minneapolis. I was dating a stripper. I was living with strippers. And you know how broken strippers can be. Most of them come from very, you know, crazy upbringings and things like that. But anyway, I got hooked on heroin, and I spent the next 10 years trying to get off of it. And it didn't matter what I tried to do, institutions, prison, you know, rehabs, detox centers. Everywhere I went, you know, my grandma used to tell me, you know, Shawn, everywhere you go, there you are. So it's like, it doesn't matter where you run, doesn't matter the geographical change. If you don't change, nothing's going to change for you. Right. And so that was something that always stuck in my head from my grandmother because I was constantly running from myself, especially once I got hooked on heroin. Like it just, you know, my life went straight down the drain. And yeah, so I ended up down in Tampa, Florida, caught a case down there, did some time, got out. Went to Chicago for a little while, but then I ended up on the East Coast where my family is, right? So I got family on the East Coast, my great aunts and great uncles and things like that. My great grandmother was even still alive at this time. And so this was in 2014 when I got out of prison. I moved to Camden, New Jersey. So I don't know if anybody knows anything about Camden, New Jersey, but Camden, New Jersey on the East Coast is called the melting pot for heroin addicts. And so I went out there to get clean, but I ended up on more dope. I always say I did more dope than a little bit because, man, it was cheap. It was pure. It was heaven for a heroin addict. I'll just put it that way. And so I ended up linking up with, you know, one of the gangs out there who was from Chicago. You know, I ended up getting a heroin connect right off the bat. And next thing you know, not only was I shooting heroin, but I was shooting cocaine and heroin. So I got to where I was speedballing. And so, man, like my life had led me to this abandoned building, and I was about to stick a needle in my arm, and I cried out to Jesus, and I said, Jesus, if you're real, if you're the God my grandmother says you are, then you'll save my life right now because I want to die. I'd finally reached a point to where I actually wanted to take my own life. Like I wanted to commit suicide. And this had never happened until this moment. I finally realized it's like, man, I'm going to be a heroin addict for the rest of my life. I had not met or known anybody who had ever recovered from a heroin addiction. And so I was convinced in my mind that I was going to die this way. And so cried out to Jesus. And I mean, I cried. I mean, I lost it. You know, I'm like, Lord, I need you. Right. So I get high right after that. I step out of this abandoned building. Now we're in the middle of the hood, open air drug market. You got ripped off abandoned buildings, people having sex in abandoned buildings. I mean, like it's infested, you know. And so I step out of this abandoned building. I go to take a left to get to the bus stop, and there was a little ministry of about 5-6 people right in the middle of the hood, laying hands on people, praying for people, preaching the gospel, giving people water, you know, helping people out, and, you know, button up suit and tie, old ladies, you know, old men. And I'm like, I'm looking, and it spooked me, because I literally just cried out to Jesus in this abandoned building. I'd never seen anybody talk about no Jesus in this, you know, in the hood like that. And so when I saw him, I tried to, like, I beelined it, and I tried to go the other direction. Well, this old man come running after me, and he caught me in the road, and he's like, I just want to talk to you. Let me talk to you. And so I end up in the middle of this circle of people laying hands on me, praying for me. This little old lady next to me looked just like my grandmother, praying for me in tongues. My grandmother prayed in tongues. I'd never heard anybody do that before besides my grandmother. And so I'm just standing there like, I don't feel anything, right? I'm completely high, but I know I just cried out to Jesus, and all these people are now praying for me. Well, the pastor of that ministry ended up taking me back to where I was staying. And just so happened that day, my great aunt, you know, come to the realization that I was shooting heroin again. So she called all, you know, my great uncles, my great aunts, and everybody, and they were going to have this, you know, this meeting with me. And so as soon as I got there with this pastor, I walk in the room, and like all my family's standing there, and my aunt's practically, you know, cussing me out. I know what you've been doing, where you been, and like I broke right there in the middle of the hallway. I dropped to my knees. I just started crying, because for weeks up until this point, I was trying to find a detox center. I was trying to find a rehab, and I couldn't find nothing short of $50,000 out of pocket just to get into a rehab center on the East Coast. And I'm like, man, so no insurance, no nothing. So that's what led me to believe that I was going to die this way, you know? And so in that moment, I broke down again in front of my family. My great uncle comes to me, and he's like, you know, I have a friend of mine that I work with who has a son who went to a discipleship program called U-Turn for Christ. He said he went to it down in Tennessee. He's like, but if you look online, I think they have some like all over the states. And so I looked online, and I scrolled down, and I saw they had this one called U-Turn in Colorado Springs. Now, I'd been here one time before because I had a cousin who lived out here, and I loved it out here. I just felt like if I ever got an opportunity to live, this would be where I'd want to live. But when I got out of prison, my cousin had left, and it was just kind of a, you know, pretty much just a shadow in my mind at that point. So when I saw that they had one in Colorado Springs, as soon as I saw it, it was like hope shot up into me. And it was like all of a sudden I just knew that's where I was supposed to go. And so I called him up, and 2 days later I was on a Greyhound bus to Colorado Springs, and that was 9 years ago, and I never looked back. I graduated this program. It's called U-Turn for Christ. It's not a 12-step program. It's one step, Jesus Christ. You know, that's how they present it. It's a 2-phase program. First 2 months are in-house. Second phase, you can get a job, but you still have to participate in the program and stuff. But when I got here, I went through one of the worst withdrawals I'd ever went through in my life. You know, I'm coming off heroin. I'm coming off Suboxone, methadone, Oxycontin, cocaine, and everything. I mean, the works, right? And so it took about a good 30 days of detox, and I didn't sleep for 15 days. You know, I remember the leaders in the program were like, man, should we take this guy to the hospital? And I would tell, man, I'd be laying there in a pool of sweat, throwing up, telling them, no, don't do it. I got to do this. I got to do this. But they were concerned. They were worried because, you know, I was looking like I was going to die at any moment. Like my heart was going to pop out my chest or something. But it didn't. You know, I latched onto the Lord. I remember I would stand at the front door like, Lord, just keep me. Just keep me. Because I could have left this program at any time. And I had never detoxed in a place to where I could actually leave if I wanted to. You know, most places you go to, like, they don't just let you up and leave like that. You know, well, this place was voluntary, and ended up completing the program. And the church that I was going to while I was in this program, I ended up marrying the secretary of that church. And so I gotta say this. So from the time I was a kid, my grandmother, she used to prophesy things into my life. And she'd be like, Shawn, one day you're going to be a pastor. one day you're going to marry a woman in the church. You're going to be a man of God. You're going to have a beautiful family. You're going to have a beautiful home. She would tell me these things all throughout my life. And I'm like, yeah, okay, Grandma, you know, as I'm running the streets, and, you know, living all crazy. Well, let me tell you, man, every single thing she prophesied into my life has come true. I am leading a ministry now where, you know, they consider me the pastor of the ministry. I don't like to wear that title necessarily. I'm not to that point yet, but I definitely see that on the horizon, maybe in the future. I definitely married a woman in the church. I have 2 beautiful daughters, a beautiful home, and I have a life today that I never would have had I not given my life to Jesus Christ.
Amen.
He has, you know, there's a verse that talks about the latter years will be better than the former.
Yes.
Right. And I wear that verse on my heart. I wear it close to my chest because just in the few years that I've been saved has been better than my best day apart from the Lord, you know?
Yeah. So Shawn, did your grandmother live to see your conversion, or did she pass before that happened?
I'm glad you asked that. No, she did not get to see it. So in 2011, so when I went to leave Minneapolis for the first time, my grandmother was actually dying of multiple myeloma. So she had a blown blood cancer, that her bones were deteriorating in her body. And so that's how she passed away, from a very, very, very painful cancer. And it was unfortunate that at her funeral, I was dope sick. You know, I remember the only thing I remember from her funeral was carrying the casket and throwing up as I'm carrying the casket because I was so sick. You know, I was like 90 pounds soaking wet, dope sick, and just very, very sick. You know, I honestly didn't know. Nobody in my family, nobody knew how long I was going to live. You know, I mean, most of my family had written me off a long time ago. The very few that I still had that were, you know, still kind of there, you know, they thought I was going to die. You know, they were just, you know, if my aunt was on here, she'd be bawling her eyes out right now because she swore up and down, that I shouldn't be here. Like my life is a living miracle. It's a living testimony to God's saving grace. So 2011, she passed away, cried out to Jesus in 2015, beginning of 2015 in that abandoned building. And then, 2 days later, I was in Colorado, and, you know, my life has changed dramatically.
Yeah. Wow.
And now I struggled hard. You know, I fell off when I came out here. I got lost all over again. You know, Colorado is very chill. It's very laid back, very peaceful. You know, I come from a life of chaos, right? We always used to say 5 minutes ago is yesterday's news because there's always something happening, right? Especially in a city like Chicago, it's like as soon as your foot touches the ground, you're off, you know? So coming out here is like I had a lot of time to stop and think. And then all of a sudden I started dealing with a lot of PTSD, you know, all of my life. And I got all of it caught up with me. Now, this was after, the way I like to say it is like the Lord saved me first before I actually surrendered my will to him, you know? But that moment I cried out to Jesus, had I died that day, I do believe I would have went to heaven. I don't believe that I would have went the other direction. And I know that, you know, just like the thief on the cross, I do believe that, you know, in that moment, I would have saw paradise. I do believe that. But God gave me an opportunity to completely surrender, and not just completely surrender, but to also become an ambassador for him. And that's what amazes me every single day when I wake up, that I realize that, man, I just don't feel worthy sometimes, you know, to have the life I have today. But yeah, I think the toughest thing for me coming out of that life was cutting ties with, you know, a lot of people you build a lot of bonds with in that gang life. You know, it's like, it's not all negative, right? You know, on the surface, obviously, you know, it's not positive, and it's not a net positive by any means. But it does give you a sense of like family, you know, it gives you a sense of camaraderie. It gives you a sense of connection, right? Because being who I am and where I come from and what I'm affiliated with, doesn't matter where I could go in the country. All I got to do is find out where they're at, and I'm in, right? I got family right off the bat. oh, what up, folk? Here, you come stay with me, man. Here, here's my fridge, here's my car, here's a little bit of money. Just met the guy, right? But if he's affiliated with the same organization, all of a sudden you get the perks, And so that's how it was for that I feel like is what kept me alive, in my past life was having those ties. Because for one, I'm a white boy in a Latin organization. For two, I got a mouth that should have got me killed a long time ago. But yeah, that was the toughest for me was to part ways with some of the guys that I was really close to. And I ended up losing the last couple guys that I was close to on the streets. They passed away. I have one left who unfortunately is a full-blown heroin addict now. And so I've been praying for him, trying to keep in touch with him, ministering to him and stuff like that. But that was the hardest transition, was coming from that life into this new life. And what did it for me, I'll tell you what did it for me. I came across that verse that the Bible talks about, how you can't sit at the table with the Lord and drink from the cup of demons. Because at that time, I was a professing Christian. I was professing, I believe in Christ and these things. But, man, you get me on the phone with my guys, and it's like all that went away. You know what I mean? It was like I didn't think twice about going right back into my old ways and my old thinking, my old talking and stuff. But when that verse hit me, that's when I felt the Lord telling me, no, I need you to cut it all off. And so I did. I cut it all off. But I had a moment out here where I got influenced by this witch that I was working with. I kind of briefly brought up before. But he ended up putting some witchcraft on me out here. And next thing you know, I was full-blown talking to demons through my phone, through my TV. And I was having these incidents where, my wife, I wasn't married to her yet, but right before we got married is when this happened. She was in the other room praying for me. She had her prayer shawl, and she was losing her hair. She got an autoimmune disorder, because she was praying for me, because I was having this stuff happen, these demonic, conversations and stuff. And then next thing you know, I cried out to the Lord again, and I asked for help. And this is kind of where Russ Dizdar comes into the picture. And I remember coming across Skywatch TV, and the first episode of Skywatch TV that I saw was with Russ Dizdar.
Oh.
And so I was just completely like locked in to how he was speaking. Like he just had this authority in the way that he spoke and the way that he preached the gospel, and it captivated me. And he was speaking like he was speaking directly into my soul, like when he was talking, And then when he started talking about all the occult stuff and all of these things, well, that's when I felt like, I started to receive like deliverance. Like I was in my living room and I'm listening to, his Ragged Edge Radio podcast, and in the middle of a podcast, I'm in my living room, flat on my face, soaking in sweat and just crying and bawling my eyes out. And I was throwing up and everything. And I just felt like things were coming out of me as he was preaching the gospel on this podcast.
Wow.
So that was my first encounter with Russ Dizdar, deliverance.
Wow.
So it was from that moment forward where like I just couldn't get enough of Russ. I couldn't get enough. I'd go around telling all his stories and stuff. Like the one that really spoke to me was him going to Himmler's castle and then you guys praying in the castle. It's like just all the stories and stuff he used to tell and everything. I was just so amazed and captivated by him, and I was so thankful that the Lord brought him to me in that moment, because my church didn't know what to do. They weren't equipped for any of this stuff. And like most of the church, I come to find out, isn't even equipped for a lot of these things, Yeah. And so I'm thankful for Russ for that. But then also my praying wife at the time had a lot to do with that as well. And then, so I had the Holy Spirit fall on me, and it dropped me to my knees. And I felt the Lord like wrap his arms around me, like after all this was said and done. And it was that moment right there where I surrendered my life to the Lord. I was like, okay, like you are the God you said you are. Like you are the God of the supernatural. Like this is real, right? Because up until this moment, all the demonic stuff was more real to me than God ever really was. You know, like I said, I had these moments where I cried out to Jesus, or, you know, even in that abandoned building, and he constantly was saving my life, right? But this is, as far as anything spiritual or supernatural goes, I didn't see any of that from God at first. I saw all that stuff in the gang life, and then, you know, in the prisons, and like even in my own personal encounters and things. And so that's what did it for me, the Holy Spirit falling on me and having that moment of deliverance. I remember I grabbed my headphones after that, and I ran across the street into the park, and I ran around the park for 3 hours because I felt so free. It was like everything vanished. The demons, the voices, everything vanished all in that moment. And so that was 6 years ago, and I've been gung-ho ever since. You know, I just been preaching the gospel everywhere, man. I go out into the parks out here, lay hands on people. You know, I preach wherever God tells me to preach, you know.
Praise God. Praise
God. That's amazing. That's amazing.
What an amazing testimony. All glory to God. All praise to God. You know, this, as Christians, this shouldn't be surprising to us, but we love hearing this, and we love just rejoicing with you about the manifest power of God. We can read the Bible and see how God got people out of some real tight spots, right? We believe that, we understand that, but this kind of brings it home for us, and, you know, in something that we can relate with a little better. So,
and not only that, but like, I got so set on fire, like I wanted to know the entire Bible. I wanted to know everything that the Bible had to say. I wanted to know all about the supernatural stuff. I wanted to, you know, it was like all of a sudden I wanted to know what this thing was really all about. And so I ended up going to Heiser's school, ended up, you know, graduating Heiser's program at Awakening School of Theology. I got my certificate of biblical studies. And so he set me on the path of, you know, he set me on fire for the word, you know, when he really revealing a lot of that supernatural stuff, like in such a scholarly way that I could actually have these conversations with other scholars, right? Not so much in just a fringe kind of way, but like in an actual topical, like theological way. I can have these conversations with people now, you know? And so I'm grateful for Michael Heiser for that. Grateful for Russ Dizdar for his ministry and his work, you know, and I'm thankful for you, Tom, because, you know, I've heard, you know, a lot of your stories and things like that. And Vicki as well, you know, I read your book and stuff and was really, you know, encouraged by that. Just some of the things you spoke about in your book and stuff. And so, yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast tonight, you know.
Hey, it's been great.
This has been a long time coming. And, of course, Kenny C., he mentioned you quite a while ago. And I said, yeah, Kenny, it sounds like a good idea. And, yeah, definitely wanted to do it. And it happened tonight. So thank God. You know, praise God. He is the deliverer, right? He
Amen.
is the healer. And can you just share a little bit? I know you have a ministry right now, like a podcast or a show that you do. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm a part of a ministry called Wrong to Strong. So the guy who heads up the ministry, his name's Julio Almanza. So Julio lives down in Arizona, but he also comes out of Chicago. He came out of like Little Village, 59th Street area. He was affiliated with a gang called the Latin Kings at that time. He was also a part of the set that I was a part of at one time as well. See, in Chicago, a lot of guys you'll see, you know, if you move to a different area, you end up joining different gangs and things, right? But Julio, he ended up running a lot of drugs for the cartel, Sinaloa cartel back in the day and stuff. And he's got a YouTube channel. You can go listen to a lot of his stories. He breaks down a lot of the gang culture and stuff as well on his channel. He doesn't do that as much anymore because when he got out of prison, he started this ministry, Wrong to Strong. And it started off as predominantly a fitness ministry for people coming out of prison. To just give them a new direction in life, right? Try to get them off the streets and try to get them focused in on something like a fitness program. And that's been really productive. So he teaches a fitness class now in the prisons in Arizona. And so I always tell him all the time, because he wasn't a believer when he got out of prison at first. Obviously, he's got stories where, you know, he had encounters with the Lord and things like that, but he didn't give his life to the Lord until after he got out of prison. And then I told him, I was like, well, Jesus hijacked your ministry, because I connected with him and also another brother, Omar Calvillo, who operates the podcast part of our ministry. So he got a hold of me one day, Julio, and he asked me to lead the Bible studies that he's going to be starting on Friday nights. And so I ended up taking that on last September. And so I lead Friday night Zoom Bible studies for Wrong to Strong. And it's open to anybody who wants to join. I will say we have a lot of ex-gang members, a lot of ex-prisoners. We've got ex-gang leaders in there too.
Wow.
And so it's pretty amazing, the work that the Lord's been doing in this ministry. I'm blown away. We're constantly leading brothers to the Lord. We had another salvation tonight, which was amazing. Awesome. We had a brother come to the Lord tonight, Alberto. Praise the Lord for that. And so we've had guys constantly, giving their lives to the Lord. But even more than that, I get to do what I feel like God's called me to do, and that's teach the Bible, right? Teach the word and preach the gospel in the process, right?
Wow.
But yes, that's what I'm affiliated with as far as my ties to an actual ministry is Wrong to Strong. So if you look that up, you'll see JC, Julio Almanzo. But then, so the podcast part of it is Wrong to Strong Chicago Podcast. And that's where we interview ex-gang leaders and people coming off the streets and coming from that life, and they give their testimonies. And so there's a lot of amazing testimonies on the Wrong to Strong Chicago Podcast, if you want to check that out. Like I said, gang leaders, ex-prisoners, ex-drug runners and things. Yep, there it is. Yep, Wrong to Strong Chicago Podcast. So that's my brother, Omar Calvillo. He was also affiliated with the same organization that I was. And so we, all of us got, similar history, similar ties. We know a lot of the same people and stuff. And we're all kind of spread out right now, which is why we do the Zoom Bible studies, because, we're all in different, we got guys in Texas, guys in Arizona, Colorado, Philadelphia, Chicago. We've actually even got guys from overseas. Like we got a guy from the Netherlands that joins us. And so we got, and our podcast is in all the prisons too. And so they actually get to listen to the podcast and things in prison, which is super cool.
Wow. That's awesome.
What an amazing ministry. That's awesome.
That's so cool. For those of us who kind of been raised in the church our whole life, we always think of Paul. I've been in the book of Acts the last few days. We always think like Paul was this like bizarre anomaly, on the road, getting knocked down and switching sides, right? But it's so cool to hear this story and hear about your ministry and just know that God is plucking Pauls out right and left, even to this day. Paul wasn't like a one-time deal, but we don't like hear that kind of stuff all the time. So this has been so encouraging. I can't wait to dive into that podcast because, we have to be reminded as a church amidst all this bad news we hear all day long that people are coming to Christ and people's lives are being transformed and they're going from death to life, and he's putting the gospel in their mouth and they're fulfilling the Great Commission. And I'm just so encouraged.
And it's not happening in these, that's what I tell people is like the revivals that are happening today, you might miss it because they're not happening in these massive movements like they did in the past.
Yeah.
Like they're happening right in the middle of our living rooms, right in the middle of our jail cells, right in the middle of our buildings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're not happening. And so we got a guy named Bill Fay. He's one of the elders that are in our Wrong to Strong Bible study. He took over the last few weeks because I've been taking care of family and stuff. But man, he's got so many connections just within the church, and like he's old school. I mean, he's been an evangelist for 40 years. He knows all the giants of the faith, man, is what I always say. But man, he just never stops talking up this ministry. And he just, every week, it's like he never shies away from making sure he lets us know that this is just such a miraculous thing that's happening here. Because, man, we couldn't have wrote this story. Only God could have done something like this. And, he's constantly reminding us of that. And I'm like, it's true. The first few years of my faith, I struggled because I couldn't find anybody else like me. I couldn't find anybody in the church that came from where I came from that got saved the way that I got saved. It took a few years before it happened, and it happened during COVID. Really, COVID was truly it was a great awakening for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we are today, man. We're just living and loving and breathing the hope of Christ. And man, we're just, every single one of us, well, I'd say most all of us, especially Julio, like the leader of Wrong to Strong. He's so, like, he always tells people, he says, I went from the Tasmanian devil to Winnie the Pooh.
I love it.
So I sent him a little Winnie the Pooh doll. But you'll see him, man. You'll be like, man, just one look at him and be like, man, I might want to stay away from that guy, right? But man, dude, he loves the Lord. He's got some great podcasts out there just sharing his faith, man. And he goes all over sharing his faith and stuff. And so he'll be out here in September. We'll be going into the Denver women's prison out here in September, him and his wife and me and my wife. And so I'm definitely keeping that in prayer and stuff, because I haven't done prison ministry yet. I do community corrections ministry because my wife works in community corrections. And so I do a lot with the community correction stuff. But so that'd be cool to start going into the prisons and start really preaching in there too. So
yeah, definitely. Shawn, is there a place on your ministry website if people want to donate?
Yeah, if you go to wrongtostrong.com, so you can go. So the entire website is still being created. We have a guy right now who's kind of the tech guy, who's putting together kind of the pieces, for the website. But the website right now, you can definitely go there and donate to the ministry. But it'll go into his USP Max program at this point. So he's doing a lot with, like I said, prison ministry. He's gotten the keys to practically every prison in Arizona. Wow. To go into these prisons. We just tonight actually had the former director of the DEA shared his testimony in our Bible study tonight. Wow. And so these are the connections we're making. I told JC the other day, I was like, bro, we're still institutionalized, man. We can't stay out of prison.
Oh, man.
Wow.
So it's been fun, man, just to see what God's been doing and all the glory he's been getting. And I just pray that we continue to bless the Lord and, with this ministry.
Amen.
So
praise God, man. Shawn, thank you so much for just sharing the testimony tonight and giving glory to God, and praise God that you're here just to share this. And God is Vic, I like what you said. God is still pulling Paul's out, and what an amazing story, guys. If you like this content, please share it. That helps us get it out. This was an amazing show tonight. And there might be somebody in your social media or in your email list or somebody at your church that needs to hear it and needs to know about the ministry Wrong to Strong and everything that's going on and what's going on with Shawn and the Bible studies. People can benefit from this. So please share it. And hey, we're not sure. We got a lot of stuff coming up and we don't know when we're going to be back, but it sure is good to be hanging out with Vicki again. Vic, thanks for bringing us a new friend. And guys, we will see you next time. Hang out. I want to say bye to you off the air, Shawn. All right.
All right.